Hello everyone, my name is Rex, and today I'm going to talk about self-determination theory and evaluate how it's implemented in Yakuza 0, which is the game I'm playing for this semester. So before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I would consider myself a quite almost hardcore gamer, maybe borderline almost addicted gamer, since I do play every day. But usually I just play with my friends and while chatting with them on Discord, and I play multiplayer online games in general, such as Apex Legends, Rainbow Six Siege, or League of Legends. Have you heard of any of those titles? And so yeah, let's get into it. So, what is Yakuza 0? Well, Yakuza 0, I would consider it an action adventure slash open world game. So, already this is quite different from what I usually play. So, I thought this was a good choice for this class. And the platform it's on is it's initially designed for PlayStation 4, but it has since then been ported to the PC, which is currently what I'm playing on. But in order to try to have the most authentic experience possible, I'm playing with a gamepad plugged into my laptop. So basically the same thing. And the story is set in Tokyo and Osaka, and it's during the late 80s Japan. And the reason is that the story is actually the origin story to two of the Yakuza series' most prominent characters. And you can see them on the cover there. On the right, it's Kiryu, and then on the left is Majima. And yeah, about the gameplay of this game, it's mostly hand-to-hand combat. I'd say if you played World of Warcraft, it's like basically similar UI, but without all the magic and spells. But there's also all sorts of other gameplay, which I'll get into in a bit. So first, we'll take a look at the main story. So the story begins in 1988 in December, and at the start, there's this cutscene of you playing as Kiryu, who has just collected a debt from someone after brutally beating them up, and then after that, you go and pay the loan shark the debt you had collected, and then after that, you it's been a long day, so you just go hit up your good old friend from the orphanage, and then you go to the bar and get a few drinks. You take a nice sip, and then voila, you start singing karaoke. And yes, this is something that is uh, something that you're forced to do in the game. And so after that, you realize that the guy that you had beat up to collect the debt from turns out he has died, and this means that someone had framed you, and now you're in trouble because you're attracting attention from the cops. And despite the fact that you are basically a yakuza is basically a Japanese equivalent of a mafia member, you still wouldn't want to kill people because that would attract a lot of unwanted attention and create a lot of problems for your clan. So because of that, your bosses call you in, and then the story basically begins from here, where you try to find out who framed you and all sort of stuff. I won't get into more details in case you want to play this game because those would be spoilers. And voila, this is where you're at. So, going away from the main story, I want to talk a bit about the world of Yakuza because arguably it's even bigger than the main story itself, and hence why the gray rectangle, or sorry, not gray, brown rectangle is like bigger for the world. So, if I were to describe it in one sentence, I would say the world is basically a detailed replica of the 80s Japan, and it has a stark contrast to the serious tone of the main story. So, as you can see on the screen, you can sing karaoke, which is basically a rhythm game, but there's more. You can also go bowling, you can also play retro arcade games such as the Sega's Outrun, which is basically a Mario Kart, but back in the 80s that you play at the arcade. But besides these simple activities, there's also activities with more depth, such as this real estate management business that you run outside. And I haven't got to this point yet, but from what I've heard and read about online, there's quite a bit of depth to it as well. So clearly, there's a lot you can do in the town of Yakuza, and I would say it's basically equivalent, the video game equivalent of a box of chocolate, because there's always something you do and you never know what you're gonna get. And when I was playing it during the 4 to 5 hours of playtime I had, it really just felt like I time traveled, visit the 80s Japan, and it was super cool. So on to the next point, which is the first aspect of self-determination theory. I want to talk a bit about the autonomy in Yakuza 0. So story-wise, the main storyline, there's actually not much autonomy because a lot of the time it's presented in a way that's similar to a movie where you just view a lot of cutscenes that are actually unskippable. But nonetheless, the writing is so excellent that I don't mind at all. But when you're exploring the world, there are actually tons of autonomy. In fact, there are 100 sub stories that, despite being short and provide no real value to your completion of the main storyline. They're just so fun and exciting to do that you just can't help but do. My favorite one is actually this sub story where you're approached by this free man wannabe punk rock band that don't actually know how to talk tough. So what they end up doing is asking you, a real gang member, trying to give them some tips on what to say to act more like a punk, or as they've written here, it's Yankee style hooliganism, where Yankee spelled with an I for some reason. And then gameplay wise, I would also say that the options are quite limited and there's not much autonomy, because the only way to progress in this game is by beating your opponents and then getting to the next stage. However, in terms of the way you can achieve this goal of beating your opponents, there's actually quite a lot of depth to the mechanics of the game. And for example, when you're playing as Kiryu, there's 3 styles to choose from, which is Rush, Brawler, and Beast. And like each style has its own strengths and weaknesses. And from what I've experienced so far, there really is no best style to choose from. And it's more about what you're comfortable with. And personally, for me, I thought the Rush style was the most comfortable because it makes your attacks the fastest. But then as a trade-off, it does less damage. So in turn, you have to go through more skill rotations in order to beat the opponent. So here you can see an illustration of how you can switch between the styles according to the game or the type of opponent you're against. And through playing against the opponent multiple times, you can slowly experiment and learn which style works the best. So onto the second aspect, which is competence. I would say that Yakuza 0 is very successful in implementing this aspect because it has short and simple combat tutorials that are woven into the story seamlessly. So particularly, often tutorials pop up while you're already engaged in the combat, and it freezes time to do so. And this is excellent because it gives you knowledge and information that can be instantly applied. And I think this uh, this really helps this. Sorry. This delivery of information on demand really helps one learn to get better at the game. So here's an example where it tells you about the heat gauge system, which essentially is more like a snowballing system where the more consecutive hits you land without being hit, you get a certain level of buff to your abilities. And then another tutorial would be this simple square square triangle combo, which is named Pokemon the Eyes. Yeah. And in terms of feedback, Yakuza 0 also provides a lot of instant feedback. Although they are not positive, I think in a game like this, it works fine if it's a negative feedback, especially thanks to the low cost of failing, which I'll talk about later. So really, it's very straightforward. If, say, for example, you use a heavy hitting move and the opponent dodges it, then chances are you could get punished and knocked down and then take a lot of damage. And these kind of feedbacks tells you like a lot of implicit information, such as like what kind of attacks are only safe in what kind of situations, or like the opponent's like block timing, so you can know when you can weave in a strong attack to catch him off guard. In terms of the difficulty of Yakuza 0, it's also very progressive because at the beginning when I was playing, I could basically just button mash and then beat all the opponents. Oh, I should know that I was playing on the normal difficulty out of the 3, which is easy, normal, and hard. However, when it got to the first boss battle, I actually died I think 3 times before I finally beat him. And I think after my third death, the game offered me an option to, do you want to switch the difficulty to easy? And then I got like super pissed, and then I started playing better, and then I beat that boss. So yeah, the difficulty in this game definitely progresses over time, but then never to the point where it's way too difficult that there's no way you can win. And even though when it's easy, at times those are mostly like fights that are low stakes to begin with, such as being challenged by random thugs on the street. So when it comes to boss battles such as this one on the screen you can see right now, those do get to a level of difficulty that is almost I guess analogous to the zone of proximal development that we mentioned in class. And finally, there is a lot of freedom to fail in this game, despite there being basically no autosaves. So whenever you're wandering around in the town, there are tons of payphones scattered around. Note that this is back in the 80s, so it makes sense for there to be a lot of payphones where you can save. And then, however, during long storylines where you are not freely walking in town, the game also autosaves at certain checkpoints. So should you ever lose all your health from fighting, you won't get reset and have to do everything from the beginning again, which I think is great. All right, one moment, let me drink some water. All Right. So onto the last aspect of Yakuza Zero, or self-determination theory, which is belonging. I think this is the weakest of the three aspects in terms of when it comes to implementing it in the game of Yakuza Zero. And it's unfortunate, but I think a lot of this is limited to the nature of single player. So there isn't much collaboration you can do, as you can't play with any friends or even strangers online. And no matter how you play, like no matter how immersed you get, at the end you still know that there's no one on the other side of the screen that are affected by the consequences of your actions. And really the moments of relevance are limited to the scope of the game, where you know you can experience like a major loss or major win, but it's all limited to the character that you're playing, such as Kiryu or Majima. And I find that whenever I am in the game, I do feel very strong moments of relevance, such as when I lose or when I like hit the jackpot, like when I hit a strike in bowling. But the moment I quit and close out of the game, I don't see any of that carrying over into my real life, as this setting or the context of this game is just far too different from what I'll ever experience in real life. Yeah, so here is an example that even though you can teach these wannabe punk rock band members, like sometimes you teach them some wrong lines, say that on their days off they go rescue puppies and see the crowd laugh at them. It's a good laugh, but then at the end of the day, it doesn't carry over to any real meaningful moments, I'd say. So in conclusion, referring to the Van Roy and Zamon's gamification heuristics, I think these four heuristics are clearly implemented in Yakuza 0 because one, it avoids obligatory uses, which like it provides you with a lot of options to fight, and there are no best option that you must use to beat a certain boss. The point two, it also provides a moderate amount of meaningful choices. Sorry, I got cut off on this presentation slide. But really, not only do you have like free options and tons of combos to pull off during the combat, which is the core mechanic of the game, but outside of the game, when you're exploring the open world of 80s Tokyo or Osaka, there's also tons of funny side stories that you can do. And I think although they don't contribute anything meaningful to the main storyline, I think they are meaningful in the way that you experience this alternative culture in the time before, well, at least for me, before when I was born. So I thought that was great. And then point three is that it sets challenging but manageable goals, which really are mostly the combat. And it provides you with enough scaffolding that you can easily, slowly get better and get the timing right when it comes to attacking, that sort of stuff. And finally, it makes the system flexible because not only can you play it using different methods of control, such as keyboard or mouse or with a controller, but really there is just a lot that you can do outside or inside the main storyline, and you can play this game however you want. You want some serious crime drama, you got it. You want to have just chill out and go bowling, you also got it. So yeah, thank you for listening. Here are my references. And seriously, if you're interested in some Japanese crime drama, or you're just interested in exploring the 80s Japan, like, or you want to do both, then even better, go for it. I would definitely recommend you to get this game and try it out for yourself. Thank you.